protection, of blessing around them and around their families, that you would always keep them safe. Father, in times of stress and in times of trial, that you would draw them close to you. We thank you for the fire department, for the police department, for our paramedics, for them donating their time to come out here tonight and to spend time with us and to train us and teach us. And Father, I pray a special hedge of protection around our houses of worship. May they always be safe places to gather, safe places to study your word, and safe places to be in fellowship. We give you this night, ask that you go before us. We love you, and we pray these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Hancock. Well, good evening, folks. My name is Micah Lunt, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here with you and a lot of my colleagues and partners for the next about 2.5 hours. Don't worry, it'll be over before you know it. Before we get too terribly started, there's some folks that I would like to recognize. This is an incredible facility to do this training. And Pastor Hancock has been involved working with me for the past several weeks to get this set up here. First Baptist Church Forney opened their doors to us to do this, and I really appreciate him and Senior Pastor Dr. Pritchard as well. So I'd like to really recognize and give a round of applause to First Baptist Forney. Back in the back, the technology director, Donnie Dorsey, is making sure that all of this all goes well, and I really appreciate his assistance also. Here in the city of Forney, whenever we talked about doing this, I went to my boss and said, hey, Mr. Tony Carson, he's our city manager. You out here somewhere? We gotta recognize you. He's out in the hallway. Well, my boss, Tony Carson, whenever I went out and said, hey, we'd like to do this, he said, make it happen. And that's the kind of support that, as a chief of police, I really, really enjoy when we can do that. And Mr. Carson is, of course, supported by our mayor and city council. And I know we have at least one member of our city council here tonight, Mr. Johnson. Are there any other members of Forney City Council here? I knew I was going to do that. You'll not believe this, but on my desk, there is a jar that I put money into every time I make that mistake. And this is the first time I've given this presentation since I've been here in Forney. So you'll have to forgive me, and I know my officers are going to be keeping track of how much money I have to put in that jar by the time tonight is over. So really want to express our appreciation to the City Council for all of their support. All right, if you would please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you'll remain standing and observe just a brief moment of silence for victims of active attack events. Thank you. You may be seated. All right. So this evening, what we're going to do is a couple of different parts. We're going to start out with, I'll be leading this part of the presentation, and we're going to talk about active attack science. Everything that I tell you tonight is based upon scientific data. It's all data-driven. It's not my opinion, not the opinion of just the Forney Police Department or any of my partners in public safety. This stuff is based upon science, and we'll talk about that. We've got to talk about victim thinking. When victims encounter tragedy of any kind, they go through a few different types of thought processes. There's 3 stages. The quicker you make it through stage 1 and 2 and get to the 3rd phase, which is the action phase, the more likely it is that you're going to survive that disaster and actually have success. So we're going to figure out how to overcome being a victim. Then we're going to talk about the specific strategies to employ during an actual active shooter, active attack event. Those are the avoid, deny, defend strategies. Each of you, when you came in, you received a handout. And on the front side of that handout, where there's the picture of the handgun, you've got avoid, deny, defend in 3 columns. And below that, there are some specific tactics. Avoid, deny, defend is a good slogan, but if you don't understand the specifics underneath each one of those words, then that's not good enough. You've got to know how to employ those specific tactics. And then whenever I'm finished, my co-presenter, Doug Schletz, who's over here on the right side of the stage, he's going to come up and talk about bleeding control. And that part of the presentation is absolutely incredible. It's relevant to active shooter, active attack events, but it's also relevant to absolutely any event that you might encounter where someone is experiencing life-threatening bleeding. So he and his team are going to talk about how to apply tourniquets, how to apply direct pressure on other types of wounds so that you can hopefully keep someone from bleeding to death. At the end, we'll have a question and answer session. The way that'll work is Pastor Hancock will come back up. Those of you that have questions will come forward. You'll ask your question here to him with a handheld microphone. That way everybody can hear. And then if the question's for me, I'll answer it. If the question is for Doug, he'll answer it, and we'll go from there. So there'll be plenty of time. We will take one break during this overall event, so you'll have the opportunity to go out and use the restroom. And like I said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. It'll be over before you know it. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to refer to many active shooter, active attack events. At no point in time will I ever mention the name of one of the perpetrators of these events. And I'd ask that you do the same. I'd also ask for our media to start to do the same thing as well. We as police in general, if one of these things happen, we need to give that name one time. And that's it. That's all we have to do as a matter of public record. But giving that name repeatedly of someone who perpetrates this gives that person power. And they commit these atrocities in order to generally bring attention to themselves or bring attention to some kind of cause that they feel they've been wronged by the world. So by not mentioning their names, we can take that power away from them, and that's important. You'll also hear about some science later on as to why that's important as well. So we'll never mention any of the names of any of the perpetrators. I mentioned this science. There's really two major sources of science for these two programs. One is Avoid, Deny, Defend. That's from the Texas State University, housed down in San Marcos. And there are actually academics there, PhD level folks, and they have a whole research lab that conducts research on strictly active shooter events. Every time one of these things happen, they analyze it with a fine-tooth comb, figure out what people did that was helpful, what people did that wasn't helpful, and they continuously modify their programs. The United States Department of Homeland Security came up with another program. It's called Run, Hide, Fight. Run, Hide, Fight is very, very similar to Avoid, Deny, Defend. It's just a different slogan. The problem with Run, Hide, Fight is hide in particular is very poorly understood. We still have people when these incidents happen that choose to hide under a desk or hide under a church pew and do nothing else. And that is, unfortunately, a recipe for disaster. You're going to see some examples and data that support that. So you've got to understand what's underneath of Avoid, Deny, Defend, the specific tactics that are underneath each of those, and that's what this presentation will cover. So the modern era of active attack science really began with the Columbine shooting in April of 1999. Does anybody remember what the problem was with the police response to the April 1999 shooting in Columbine? So the police didn't go in. Police responded in droves. We got there in huge numbers. We set up a very tight perimeter outside the school, and then we pressed the big red button to call the experts. The experts were members of our SWAT teams to come and respond. Well, what does that take? Time. Active shooter, active attack incidents, if nothing else, are all about time. It's really interesting when you think about it, but it all boils down to time. How long does that shooter have access to victims? How long before police arrive if the shooter is still alive when we get there? How long before someone applies a tourniquet to a gushing extremity wound? How long before someone puts pressure on a chest wound if they've got a chest wound? How long before a person gets transported and is laying in a surgical center to receive a life-saving intervention? They really are all about time when you boil everything else down. So that was the problem with the police response in Columbine. And almost overnight, the police changed their tactics. And we now go immediately to the sound of the gunfire, the source of the threat, and address that. The next major incident that really changed the way that we as public safety professionals as a whole respond to these things was the shooting in Aurora, Colorado at the movie theater. Anybody happen to know what the problem was there? So there, the police were able to respond quite quickly, get the suspect taken care of, and then we called our friends in the fire department and EMS, and we said, hey, we got hurt people in here, come on in. And they said, heck no, that is not what we signed up for. It's not safe to come inside. And so we had to start training with both police, fire, and emergency medical services and get everybody on the same page. And we started to develop what's called the Rescue Task Force model. And now, whenever we have these kinds of incidents, we as police provide force protection to these people over here, and we take them in to the warm zone. We take them into the threatening area so that they can provide those life-saving interventions and extract injured people and get them out and get them transported quickly. So that training has been going on for several years now, and that's training that we are trying to practice here in this area as well. FBI released a study in 2013. Most active shooter events are over in less than 5 minutes. Well, how long is 5 minutes if you're on the receiving end of a gun battle? An eternity, right? Couple that with the next bullet. The average police response time to an active shooter incident across the nation, so everywhere from NYPD, which has tens of thousands of officers, the largest police agency in the nation, to the smallest single-person's police department. The average is 3 minutes. So when you take these two bullets together, really what that boils down to is you need 8 minutes worth of tips, tactics, and tools to keep yourself safe from the shooter or to provide life-saving interventions on yourself or somebody else to keep from bleeding out. And that's what we're hoping to provide for you tonight. Survivable gunshot wounds need surgery. So where you want to get shot, there we go. Come on, there's people paying attention, right? So where you want to get shot, if you're going to get shot, is in an extremity. Why? Because if you apply a tourniquet above that location, it doesn't matter if you get shot with a 30-06 and it blows your arm off. If you'll get that tourniquet put on above it, you're good for over 2 hours without any additional damage to you whatsoever. So that's where you want to get shot if you're going to get shot. Certainly nobody wants to get shot, but if it's going to happen, that's a good place for it to be. If you get shot in this area of your body, the thoracic area, neck, head, obviously that's pretty bad. Some of those gunshots are survivable. Some of them, unfortunately, are not. It doesn't matter if you got shot laying on top of a surgical table and you've got the best surgeon in the world, they're not going to be able to save you. But sometimes they are. And what we know from the data, and some really recent data, is that if you have a survivable gunshot wound in one of those areas, you really need to be laying in an operating room within 30 minutes. Think about when I talked about time before, about how important time management is in these situations. How can we get people that are gunshot victims into an operating room that quickly? How can we do it? CareFlite, yes, CareFlite will certainly help, but you all can help with that. When you look at what happened in Las Vegas, Nevada, at that shooting, Las Vegas, Nevada, when that shooting occurred, was full. It was a country music festival, right? And that crowd was full of probably a crowd not too terribly different than the one sitting in front of me. It was full of a lot of veterans. It was full of a lot of first responders. And they took action and actually self-transported several victims themselves directly to hospitals. And that contributed to saving lives. So it's all about time, all about getting people quickly to the kind of care that they need. This whole presentation, folks, is about your actions. And this is the tough news. It's about your actions if you choose to take the right actions, and it's about your inaction if you choose not to take action. And you're going to see example after example where inaction leads to unnecessary loss of life. So I'm hoping that after seeing all this, you'll partner with me if you're ever involved in one of these things, and you'll know what to do. I've taught literally thousands of people this material now, and I've had 2 occasions where folks have actually, after having a presentation like this, they have been in an active shooter situation and said, hey, I can't believe it, but what you said actually mattered. It really did make a difference. You talk to some of the survivors from the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. They had just had training very similar to this before that shooting. And what they learned there was credited with saving their lives. So that's the best I can hope for, is that it saves somebody here who, God forbid, is involved in one of these things. You'll know what to do when that comes. So one of the things we're going to start with is kind of a case study. We're going to look at the Columbine shooting. Now, sometimes when I do this, folks get a little uncomfortable because it's a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking, okay? People do it to cops all the time. It'll be all right to do it in this situation, I promise. So the difference between now and April 1999 is this training didn't exist, right? I don't fault this woman that we're about to listen to, because no one was doing this kind of training. No one was teaching people how to respond. So she didn't have that benefit. But this and all the examples that I'm going to show you are worth looking at, because you can learn from it. You can actually not commit some of the same struggles that they did that will contribute to living. So this is subtitled. It'll help you be able to read what is being said, because it's a little bit hard to hear. But let's start and take a listen, and we'll talk about things as they unfold.
Okay, has anybody been injured, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the school is in a panic, and I'm in the library. I've got students down under the table, kids. Heads under the table. I'm kids are screaming. Some of the teachers are, trying to take control of things. We need police here.
Okay, we're getting them there.
Police here.
Who is the student, ma'am?
I do not know who the student is.
Okay.
I saw a student outside. I was in hell, dear God. Okay.
Okay, so here's some questions I got for you. What is happening right now at the Columbine High School? Complete and total panic and chaos, right? It's not a good day. Things are not going well. What life-saving interventions has the caller engaged in up to this point? So I'm hearing really two different answers. One is nothing, and one is she did call. So you're both right. You're both right. So the reason that you're both right is because calling does what? It gets us on the way. As you're going to hear in just a second, though, the dispatch center, the call taker that this person is talking to says we have a lot of people on. One of the things that we know from looking at all these incidents is when they happen, everybody and their dog calls 911. We are going to get the help call. And at my dispatch center, I have two dispatchers that are on duty. And you can imagine all the things that they are trying to do when one of these things is happening. They're talking to callers, they're trying to dispatch us, they're trying to dispatch CareFlite, they're trying to dispatch the fire department. They have a lot to do. They have a lot to do all the time, but they really have a lot to do when there's a critical incident going on. So calling 911, as you see on the handout that you have, is important to do, but you only want to call 911 when you're safe. If you need to be engaging in an avoid, deny, or defend strategy, that's what you need to do before you call 911. Do you think that this person had ever thought about what she might do if she ever found herself in this situation before now? No. And really, I mean, I can't fault her for that. April 1999, these things weren't, this active shooter wasn't an everyday dinner time term like it is now. Everybody knows what that is. Everybody knows what that means. It's different now than it was then. But she hadn't thought about it. So I need some help. Who has a stopwatch? All of you have stopwatches. You have smartphones, right? Who's going to be my timekeeper? Right here. Fantastic. Let me know when you're ready. All right, here we go.
I apologize. I said, what's going on out there? And he said, oh, it's probably something different. I said, me a joke. I said, well, I don't think that's a good idea. And I went walking outside. I think he was down to see what was going on. He turned the gun straight at us and shot. And my God, the window went out. And the kid standing there with me, I think he got hit.
Okay.
Something in my shoulder.
Okay. We've got help on the way, ma'am.
That's it.
Okay.
Oh, God.
Stay on the line with me.
Oh, God.
How long? 34 seconds. What can you do with 34 seconds? Score 2 touchdowns? What can you do with 34 seconds, folks? Run, hide, avoid, or deny. So, did any of that happen here? Unfortunately, it did not. Now, what else did you hear in the background? Is the shooter getting closer or going farther away? He's getting closer. Those gunshots are getting louder. So our opportunity is closing from what we had. Now, before, the clip that we listened to before, that's about a minute long. So now we're up to a minute 20, minute 30 or so seconds of opportunity that we've not yet utilized. One more clip. Let's see what happens.
Stay down.
Do we know where he's at?
I'm sorry?
Do we know where he's at?
Okay. I'm in the library. He's upstairs. He's right outside of here.
He's outside?
He's outside of this hall.
Outside of the hall or outside
The hall.
Okay.
There are alarms and things going off. There's smoke. My God, smoke is like coming into this room.
Okay.
I've got the kids under the table here. I don't know what's happening in the rest of the building. You've also got smoke in the building. I don't know. I'm sure someone has to be calling 911 besides
Yes,
you.
we've got a lot of people on. Okay. I just want you to stay in the line with me. We need to know what's going on.
Okay.
Okay?
I am on the floor.
Okay. And you've got the kids
in the
there?
library, and I've got every student in this library on the floor. You better stay on the floor.
Is there any way you can lock the doors?
Smoke is coming in from out there, and I'm a little
Okay.
The gun is right outside the library door, okay? I don't think I'm going to go out there.
Okay, you're at Columbine High School?
I got 3 children.
Okay, we got it.
Okay? I'm not going to go to the door to shut the door, okay? I've got the kids on the floor.
About how much time was that? 59 seconds. So now we're up to well over 2 minutes of opportunity. Have we engaged in any additional life-saving actions? Unfortunately not. And now where is the wolf? Right outside the door, okay? Why did the why did the caller choose not to go to the door? What was her reason? She has 3 kids. That was the reason. So let's process that a little bit. If that's my mindset, I've got 3 kids, what am I thinking that going to the door is going to cause? I'm going to get shot. I'm not going to be there to be the mom for the 3 kids. But folks, what's the alternative? If the wolf makes it inside the door, that same outcome is going to occur. Okay? So it's very unfortunate, but sometimes engaging in avoid, deny, defend strategies is not without risk. And unfortunately, you're going to see some examples where folks engaged in those strategies and they paid the ultimate price, but they saved other people as a result of it. And other needless lives did not perish because of their actions, and they are true heroes. Disaster response. We got to talk about this. How many of you have flown commercially? Right, on the airplane? Very good. What happens whenever you fly? You get training, right? Every single time you fly, you get training. And when you get that training, they tell you how to put these masks on, right? And even if you should forget, there is a picture on every single bag as to how the mask is supposed to fit. Can any of you think of a disaster situation where in the disaster, immediately the thing that you need to survive is given to you like a gift from God within easy arm's reach? You don't even have to stand up to get to it. Is there any other disaster situation where something like that happens? I can't think of one. Folks, if we as Americans ought to be able to do well in a disaster situation, the sudden decompressurization of an aircraft cabin is it. We've all flown, we all get the training every single time we fly, but this is an accurate reflection of our ability to respond to a disaster. Every single person that you can see here has that mask on incorrectly. Every single person. We're very good at many, many things as Americans. We truly are. But disaster response, unfortunately, is not one of them. and we've got to get better. We've got to get better. So let's talk about some heroes. Anybody know who James Shaw is? He's the Waffle House hero. You might remember in the news a few years ago, there was a shooting at a Waffle House in Tennessee, and James Shaw saved the day. This is a picture of Mr. Shaw. You'll notice that his right hand is bandaged. What happened in the Waffle House is there was a man that came in late in the night, and he began shooting. He happened to have a long gun. It wasn't a pistol. And he shot several times. Mr. Shaw rushed him, grabbed a hold of the gun with his, and he grabbed a hold of the barrel with his right hand. The reason his right hand is bandaged is because it's burned. He didn't get shot. It's actually burned from how hot the barrel got. Mr. Shaw was able to wrestle away the weapon from him, and the suspect was later arrested by police. Let's look at what he said. When he reloaded his clip, that felt like 30 minutes. What was that for Mr. Shaw? Opportunity, and it was opportunity that he seized. I looked at him and he wasn't looking at me. Again, opportunity that Mr. Shaw seized. He had the barrel down. Again, opportunity that Mr. Shaw seized. And then I was like, do it now, go now. I just took off. And that was his mindset. That was what he was thinking. He wasn't thinking about, I've got X loved ones, but if I'm going to make it out okay, and if these other people are going to make it out okay, this is what I have to do. And he engaged in a very, very good defend strategy as a result of that. Another hero, Mr. Riley Howe. This is from University of South Carolina, I believe. There's a great quote here by Winston Churchill. Sometimes doing your best isn't good enough. Sometimes you must do what is required. Unfortunately, Mr. Howe paid with his life, and there's a nice tribute to him here in this video.
We talk about heroism, and you're going to give first responders, and you're going to hear about a couple professionals who are extremely heroic in their response to this incident, which obviously saved lives. What you may not hear is the first and foremost hero, as far as I'm concerned, and his name is Riley Howe. He was probably the second fatality in this incident. His family, as you might imagine, is traumatized. They're devastated. But his son, seeing exactly what was going on, did exactly what we train people to do. You're either going to run, you're going to hide and shield, or you're going to take the fight to the assailant. Having no place to run and hide, he did the last. But for his work, the assailant may not have been disarmed. Unfortunately, he gave his life in the process. But his sacrifice saved lives.
So that's what we're talking about. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about disaster response. This work is by a lady whose name is Amanda Ripley. If you're taking notes or you happen to like to read a lot and you have not read Amanda Ripley's book called The Unthinkable, I highly recommend it. Amanda Ripley was a reporter for Time magazine. She covered a lot of disasters. And as she covered these tragedies, she was really interested in the fact that she started to see similarities between people that died and similarities between people that lived, no matter what the disaster was. Fire, alien invasion, flood, active shooter, didn't matter. She observed these similarities, and she thought, well, what's up with that? Her work revealed that people go through these three phases, the first being denial, the second being what's called deliberation, and then the last being decisive moment. The key is getting through denial and deliberation quickly so you get into that action phase, and we're going to talk about each one. So denial in 5 easy steps. Swallow your emotion, ignore your intuition, reason away the evidence, pretend all is well, rinse, lather, repeat. This is not the kind of denial that someone experiences that's a substance abuser, alcoholic, that kind of thing. This is the kind of denial that your brain does for you automatically, when it's got information coming in that it doesn't like. So a good example, we're all in here talking about active shooters. If we started to hear loud pops down the hallway, we would probably think it's gunfire because that's what our mind is primed to do. But if we were in here on Sunday listening to a sermon and we heard loud pops, we might attribute it to what? Fireworks, car backfiring, balloons popping, a whole host of other things that our brain would rather process than the atrocity of someone shooting a gun inside of a church. That's what denial is. We have to get our brain to accurately interpret the information that's coming in so that we can take the proper action as quickly as possible. Deliberation is trying to, once you've figured out that there's a problem, then figuring out what to do about it. Here's the pretest. Is it harder to come up with a solution to a problem if you've thought about it beforehand, maybe even practiced, or if you're faced with difficult odds and you have to come up with something on the fly? If anybody picked option B, we need to talk at the break, all right? Option A is clearly the correct answer. So just a real quick PBS special on The Unthinkable by Amanda Ripley. Again, I cannot recommend this book enough. You really will enjoy it if you read it.
Most of us will know someone who is directly affected by a disaster. And more to the point, we will experience personally trauma and loss and change.
The average person typically doesn't assess the risk they face.
Unfortunately, I think that sometimes the way we talk about disasters cultivates fatalism instead of resilience, cultivates fear instead of strength.
There is a general feeling that if you focus on emergency procedures too much, then people are going to be afraid and they're not going to fly. But that is not the case. The better prepared people are, the more confident they're going to feel, the less afraid they're going to be, and the better they will do in an emergency.
And that's true across the board. The reason that it's true, my background's in psychology. I promise I won't nerd out with you too much here, but this is pretty cool stuff. So where I want you to be during a disaster is right here. This is in your limbic system. The reason that I want you to be in that part of your brain during a disaster is because that's the part of your brain that is responsible for memories and habits. So if you think before something happens how you might respond, or if you even practice it, then little bits of nuggets get stored here in the center part of your brain. And the neurons that run up and down your brainstem can more easily and quickly get to that information than when you have to think of what to do using your neocortex, which is way out here. The neocortex is a great part of the brain. That's why we're on the top of the food chain, right? We are allowed to think about the future and plan how we might perform in the future. Dogs, cats, horses, cattle, they don't walk around thinking about what they're going to do tomorrow. They only think about what's happening right now. No other animal can do that. We can think and prepare for the future. So I want you to use your neocortex, but I want you to use that before disaster strikes so that you can be here when disaster strikes. Where I never want you to be during a disaster is over here in the brainstem and the cerebellum. That's what's responsible for our animalistic fight, flight, or freeze response. And unfortunately, during active shooter, active attack events, what happens a lot of times is that part of the brain contributes to us freezing and not taking action. And not taking action, again, as we've talked about, is responsible for unnecessary loss of life. So you say, okay, well, all that's great, but maybe I just didn't get around to thinking about what I might do, and I get into a stressful situation, and I start to freak out, right? My sympathetic nervous system kicks in, my heart rate goes up, respiration rate goes up, all that stuff starts to happen. Well, if your heart rate goes up a little bit, say between 120 and 150 beats per minute, that's actually good. You can perform well when your heart rate goes up a little bit more. It gets blood into your legs, into your arms, so that you can engage in a run or fight or avoid strategy. When your heart rate gets up really high, like over 175 beats per minute, bowel and bladder control can become difficult. That's why that column is brown. So we don't want it to get that high. And you say, okay, well, that's great, but how am I able to keep my heart rate down? Well, how many of us in here are veterans or currently serving in the military? Absolutely. Let's give you all a round of applause. Thank you all very much for your service. So you guys can take a nap during this slide because you know all about it. This is combat and tactical breathing, okay? Those of you that may engage or know things in the wellness circle or the psychology circle, you'll also know about this. It's taught in that area as well. Combat and tactical breathing is based on this principle. You may not be able to control anything that's going on in your environment, but as long as you're conscious, you can control how fast you're breathing. So if you feel yourself starting to get super nervous, super keyed up, maybe how I was several minutes ago, you can engage in combat or tactical breathing. How does it work? Work with me here. So blow all the air out of your lungs, get it all out, all out, all out. All right, now breathe in, 1, 2, 3, hold, 1, 2, 3, exhale, 1, 2, 3, hold, 1, 2, 3, and then you would just repeat that. And you might say, well, okay, if I'm super keyed up, I can't do that for a count of 3. That's too long. That's fine. Just change the count. Change it to 2 if you need to. The point is that you're concentrating on controlling your respiration rate, and it's immediately and directly related to your heart rate. I've seen live demonstrations of this. I've been hooked up to it myself, and you can just see the heart rate very, very quickly go down when you engage in combat and tactical breathing. What else can we do? Shift your emotions. What was the primary emotional experience of the caller from Columbine? Fear, panic. Did that fear and panic motivate her to take action? No, in fact, it motivated her not to take action. What kind of emotions actually motivate us to do things sometimes? I heard it, anger, right? Anybody in here ever sent an angry email? One that you maybe regretted later? You got angry and you did something that you might not otherwise have done. Well, in an active shooter situation, that's okay. It's okay to get angry at somebody that's shooting at you. It might not be angry to get okay to a colleague and send them an email, but in this case, it's okay. Angry can motivate us to take action. The last thing, stay fit. Amanda Ripley in her research consistently found this. Unfortunately, those who were less fit did not tend to survive as well. I used to weigh almost 300 pounds, so I know what the struggle can be like. But do what you can to stay fit. Anybody familiar with the infamous Station nightclub fire in West Warwick, Rhode Island? I know my fire guys are that are in the audience. So what's really interesting about this fire is there's good examples here of situational awareness, good examples of denial and deliberation. I'll set this up for you a little bit. This nightclub holds about 400 people, and there was a live band playing. They had a bunch of styrofoam decorations up on stage, and they thought that indoor fireworks would be a great mix for that. Unfortunately, as you'll see, that did not turn out so well. So what I want you to think about in here is, did anybody consider the fact that they might have to leave this place quickly? And let's see how that works out. So I'm going to kind of narrate as we go through. You can see the fireworks up on stage, and you can see this guy that's using the camera, having a good time. It's a nightclub. People are drinking. There's some alcohol. You can see the fire has started already up there. So we've started the clock. Our person who holds the camera starts to think, this might not be good. So they start to go toward the back. Everybody else still, now here's a leader. See that person pointing toward the door? The problem is, see the door right behind him? That's an emergency exit that's right by the stage. Nobody goes out that door. Now, granted, it's close to the fire, so it wouldn't have been an available exit for long, but it certainly is available right now. So what's going through everybody's mind right this minute? Oh my goodness, the place is on fire, it's filling with smoke, I got to get out of here. So it's been a minute since the fire started now. What happens with styrofoam when you burn it? It smells real bad and super black, thick smoke, right? Very quickly, it's going to get really hard to see inside. can see the black smoke billowing out there. 90 seconds. Here's what's so disheartening. Look at all of these people piled up on top of each other at the main entrance. So this is the floor plan to the station nightclub. Where we just saw all those people is labeled there as door number 1. That's the entrance hall. And as you can see, it was designed for people to come into the entrance hall and then fan out onto the main dance floor. The fire started here and spread in this direction. This door that I pointed out while the fire was burning is labeled door number 4. That's the one that nobody utilized. And then there's another emergency exit over here by the main bar, and then this is a kitchen, and so it's a public place. They are required to have an exit close to the kitchen. These numbers are bodies, and the most unfortunate number there is 31 right in the entryway, close to 9, close to 18. All those people died trying to get out of the main entrance. Why were they all trying to get out of the main entrance? Because that's the only path that was programmed into their brain. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't get anything else out of this whole presentation, get this. Your brain will give you a plan A exit strategy every time you go somewhere. Your brain recorded how you came in here, for those of you that have never come in. You have to develop the plan B in case A is blocked when you need it quickly. Now, what kind of an ask is that? How long does it take you to come up with that? It really, in most times, takes you however long it takes to swivel your head and look for those green or orange exit signs. That's all of the ask that is. So it's not much work. Now, if you're at a shopping mall or you're at some place like that where you're moving around, you have to kind of update yourself, all right? Where's my nearest exit now? But that can absolutely make the difference between life and death in an active shooter, in a fire, or any other kind of situation. Deliberation. So that's the next stage. These are two fancy words, scripting and practice. Scripting just means thinking ahead. Practice is like doing a drill, okay? These are the quickest ways to get through deliberation. If you haven't thought ahead or you haven't practiced, you got to come up with it on the fly, and we already have the test showing that was bad. Anybody know who Rick Rescorla is? You read Amanda Ripley's book, you'll learn a lot about him. He is a true American hero. He came to the United States in the 90s. He served in the military over in the UK, and he was hired by a financial company that was housed in the Twin Towers. Up on the 50th to 70th floor is where his company was housed at. He was the safety guy. He was the vice president for corporate security. And he was a little nutty, truth be told, and kind of a doomsdayer. But he said, you know what? He said, this place is probably a pretty good target, and I think that somebody's going to take advantage of the basement downstairs where we all park, and somebody's probably going to try to blow that up. And of course, that happened in 1993. Then, after that, he said, well, the next thing they'll probably try to do is hijack an aircraft and fly it into the Twin Towers. So what he did as the vice president of security is he had unannounced mandatory evacuation drills for all of the people in his company. It was about 2,700 people. Now, this was a financial company in the early 90s. How did big financial companies do a lot of their business in the early 90s? On the phone, right? Because the internet didn't exist. So how does a mandatory, unannounced evacuation drill affect the bottom line of a financial company that operates on the phone? Do you think he was a well-liked man? Not until September 11th, when literally every single employee of that company survived because they recognized what was happening, they knew what to do, and they engaged in the actions that saved their lives. So Rick Rescorla, again, true American hero. Unfortunately, he did die when the South Tower collapsed. He was going back inside to make a final sweep for survivors, and his actions saved over 2,700 lives. Anybody know about the movie Sully? Miracle on the Hudson, right? If you haven't seen it, I'm fixing to spoil it for you. Plane goes down. So the reason that we're going to look at this is a fantastic example of denial and deliberation and decisive moment. So we're going to kind of look at this as we go through. Take a listen. It's kind of hard to hear. I'll catch you up on the brakes.
Cactus 1549, 700, climbing 5,000.
Cactus 15.9, departure to contact line, maintain 15000.
Maintain 15000, Cactus 1549.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds, so you lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures. Got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately. Cactus.
So what's the problem on board Cactus 1549 right now? No engines is the problem because of a bird strike, right? That has been said numerous times, okay?
Cactus 1529, which engines? He lost thrust in both engines, he said. Got it.
So these are air traffic controllers that are literally sitting in a super quiet room, probably wearing headsets, right? They heard what he said. They physiologically heard it, but their brain did not allow it on the one gentleman's part to process. He denied it. His brain was like, it's not cool for planes to lose engines. It's certainly not cool for planes to lose both engines. So it wasn't letting him hear. Best example of denial that I can give you. Now we're going to continue and see if you can pick out some of the other examples that continue to happen.
Cactus 1529. If we can get it to you, do you want to try to land runway 13?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
All right, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire. Actually, LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
So there, if you didn't happen to hear it, the air traffic controller offered the pilot a runway at LaGuardia. He offered him 3-1. Pilot said, nope, probably can't do that. Going to have to land in the Hudson. And the air traffic controller says, great, go ahead and land on runway 13. So not only did he not hear the pilot say, I can't do that, but then he transposed the numbers as well. So, you know, he's probably at the brown level of the column we talked about before, right, where his heart rate is going. The pilot, though, where is Captain Sullenberger? Calm, cool, and collected, right? Is he not who you want flying every one of your flights? I mean, he's retired now, but man, I would love to have him as my pilot any day of the week. So one last clip here. The air traffic controller at LaGuardia is going to call over to Teterboro and talk to him, and then listen how this air traffic controller handles it over there.
Hey, got Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge. Wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280. You can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 54718, turn left thing 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, you saw him?
So Captain Sullenberger is learning how to swim right now, putting on his swim trunks, and the air traffic controller is still trying to get him, you know, a runway to land when he keeps telling it. He just couldn't process it. Wasn't working well for him. But Captain Sullenberger, and when you watch the movie, if you haven't watched the movie, I highly recommend it. It's probably free on Amazon Prime or one of the streaming services. It's a great video, and it'll help you understand, and you'll see it in a lot better perspective after having this presentation. But he makes that decision, he and his co-pilot. It takes them 35 seconds to decide we're probably going to have to land on the water. Best decision that they could have made. It was not possible when you add the human element for them to land that plane anywhere else and not crash. Every single person that was on board that flight survived, so really, really great work by them, and just a fantastic example. All right, we're now going to spend the rest of our time talking about active attack, active shooter events. We're going to start with a definition. So I've been going back and forth, probably saying 3 different terms: active shooter, active attack, active threat. It's all the same thing. Active shooter is a term that's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. But academically, we don't call it active shooter anymore because people use things besides just guns, right? What else do they use? Cars, right? They run into people. Vehicle ramming incidents are something that we have to be concerned about. They also use cars to transport bombs. Those are vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. Of course, they use bombs. What else do they use? Knives, mass knifings, right? Those are a little bit more popular across the pond because guns are not as readily available over there. They use that weapon instead. In any case, whatever weapon the person chooses to utilize, their motive is the same. They want to kill as many people as possible in as short of a period of time as possible. And it's important to understand that because that motive helps inform some of our tactics. Everybody wants to know who's going to do the next one, what's the profile, what do I need to look for? Unfortunately, folks, there's no profile when you look at demographics. They span every single demographic variable that there is, except for one. And they're almost all men. So ladies, you get a pass. The bad guys are usually men in this case. When there is a female involved, generally she is connected to a male partner. There are exceptions, of course. The YouTube incident that happened out in California, that's a good example of a female actor only, but the vast majority of the time they're men. Otherwise, any race, any religion, any socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter. It spans really everything. What there is generally, though, is a recent crisis point. There's a video later that, and it's also related to the back of your handout, that'll go through the pathway to violence, and you'll hear some more information about that. So I'll save that for then. But lots of times there's a recent stressor of some kind, generally within the last 6 months. Divorce, job loss, something significant that's happened to that person. They have an avenger mindset. So who in here has ever been wronged by the world at some point in your life? Right? We all have been. But the difference between us and them is we got over it, right? These folks don't do that. They don't get over it, and they fixate, and then they start to plan, and then it goes downhill from there. So what you're, quote-unquote, looking for is somebody that's had some kind of stressor that then gets fixated on some negative aspect, and then they start planning. And sometimes during that planning process, they broadcast. They actually tell people, I'm thinking about doing whatever. One of the things that we know that is very true is they study other attackers. They look and watch videos, read manifestos, look at the news stories, look at how many times that person's name has been mentioned by mainstream media. So that's another reason that we try to take that power away. So if you know somebody that starts studying one of these incidents, and they're not somebody like me getting up and talking about them in a proactive way, that's a red flag. And we certainly depend on you to partner with us and share that information with us, or if you don't happen to live in the city of Forney, your local law enforcement as well. This map shows all of the active attack incidents that have occurred in the United States from 2000 until the end of 2018. By the time this is done, there will be 316 dots on this screen. It represents shooting incidents, mass knifing incidents, and vehicle ramming or vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. You'll notice that as the dots appear, they start to appear more quickly as we get closer and closer to 2018. But that's not just to try to get through the video quicker. That actually is a reflection of the fact that these are increasing. That being said, the likelihood of you or anyone that you know super well being involved in an active attack incident is low. But it certainly happens enough where you need to know what to do in case you are. This is not an advertisement to move to Montana or Wyoming. I think those are about the only states that are left, except for Hawaii. Don't think Hawaii has a dot quite yet. There's a lot of dots up there. A lot of dots. All right, let's look at what generally happens to the perpetrator. 50% of the time, the perpetrator is somehow taken care of before police arrive. In 3% of the time, they are shot by civilians. This is increasing, and I got no problem with this. No problem at all. 13% of the time, they are somehow subdued by a civilian. So a civilian physically attacks the shooter. This is also increasing. 22% of the time, they commit suicide. This is very common. It's common for an individual who is going to do this, that when you take these three things together and the three things on the next slide, these folks consider this to be their final act. They don't necessarily expect to survive, whether or not they're planning to take their own life or they expect to be killed in the process. And 12% of the time, they run away before we get there. So now we're looking at the other half. So this is after police get there. A quarter of the time, we take care of business. 11% of the time, we somehow otherwise take care of business without shooting them. 11% of the time, they commit suicide. But in only 3% of the situations do they fully surrender. So again, supporting that this is a final action by these folks. And that means that if you choose to engage, particularly in a defend strategy, you've got to have the right mindset as well. We have had our own local incidents, unfortunately. This is from the Dallas Massacre, July 7th, 2016, where 4 Dallas PD officers and 1 Dart PD officer were killed. This is from the large house shooting in Plano that left 8 people dead just a couple of years ago. And then this is from December over in White Settlement at a Baptist church there. And that resulted in luckily only 2 deaths, because why? Civilian took care of business, absolutely. So location of attacks. 42% of the time, these things occur at places where you spend or earn your money, okay? A lot of people believe that a tremendous number of these attacks occur in our schools, and a good number of them do, an unacceptable number of them do, but the data are that they occur at places where you spend or earn your money mostly. So that's just important to know about. You break this down even further. One thing that's interesting, houses of worship, 4%. That may increase just a little bit. There's a lot of hate in the world, so whether or not it be Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, a lot of these attacks do happen at different kinds of houses of worship because of that. Down in the bottom right, lots of times I'll get a question about what's the difference between a closed business and an open business. An open business are things like stores where you can go into the majority of the area and it not be restricted. Closed businesses are where you can get into a lobby, but you can't get in any further than that. You have to wear an access badge or be escorted or something like that. Many of you probably work at such a facility. Those are the places where we see a lot of workplace violence type incidents that turn out to be active shooter, active attack incidents. Attacker connection. The vast majority of the time, the attacker has some sort of connection to the location where they perpetrate their act. Generally, there's a grievance either with the institution or the business, or there's a grievance with someone that works there. The number of deaths that occur at active shooter, active attack events are really the product of 2 things. One is how quickly that we get there, and then the other is how much access that the person has to available victims. How well a potential victim engages in an avoid or deny strategy. And that's certainly what we want to do. It is time for our break. So this little timer is for 10 minutes. As soon as 10 minutes is over, I'm going to start a video. That video is what's on the back there about the pathway to violence. If you need a little bit longer, you're just going to miss out on the video, but that's good. Restrooms are straight out either side, either to the left by the fountain or to the right. But enjoy your break, and we'll start right back up promptly as soon as all these circles are gone.
What could have been done? A question inevitably asked in the wake of a mass tragedy, this video seeks to answer by illustrating the pathway to violence, a 6-step model for identifying suspicious behavior so that potential harm can be mitigated. We begin with former Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis, who led the effort in examining what could have been done to prevent the 2013 Boston Marathon attacks.
One of the things that we recognized after sort of doing a post-mortem on the Saneyev investigation was that Tamerlan had acted out in the mosque in Cambridge. On 2 different occasions he had objected and had arguments with the imam about what the imam was suggesting. He wanted the imam to be more radical, to be more in alignment with Sharia law and less Western in the way that he was teaching Islam. If that imam had felt comfortable enough with us to call us and say, I don't know what to do with this guy, they eventually ejected him from the mosque. If at some point we had heard about that, it may have reactivated the FBI investigation. And whether it was his family or the community around him, if someone had reached out to us, it might have changed the whole trajectory of this incident.
In my view, the first line of defense is that neighborhood that will detect that anomaly. Changes in behavior, withdrawal from the community. In the case of the older Tamerlan Tsarnaev, he develops these ideas that this is being done to me because of who I am. It's important to get into that kind of nuance because narratives matter when you're trying to assess whether an individual is radicalizing or not, or on the path to radicalization. One could only hope for a model, if you will, a path to radicalization. The human mind obviously is complex, but there seems to be some general commonalities.
So what are these commonalities, and what can they tell us about potential acts of violence? Many experts agree that the key to understanding this lies within the pathway to violence.
So the pathway to violence, which was classically represented by Calhoun and Weston's model, starts off with the presence of a grievance. And to that grievance, the person begins to attach the ideation for the use of violence or significantly disruptive behavior. From ideation, then, the next stage, and we'll see increasing intensity of effort in it, is the planning stage. Now the person is thinking about the planning, the who, what, when, and where, the development of the thought, of the plan, still at a conceptual level. The next stage then is the preparatory stage. What do I need in order to fulfill the plan? The means, the weapons, the tools, the equipment, the clothing, either that is necessary to effect the plan or that has a significant psychological or fantasy. That's what persons are trying to prepare the capability or acquire the capability. In Calhoun and Weston's model, then they talk about the breach, which is about probing behaviors, checking vulnerabilities within systems to see where the best entry points are, or escape points if that's part of the plan, and then the attack or the implementation phase. Models, however, we need to keep in mind are not perfect representations of reality. They're approximations to give us a way of thinking about issues, of understanding the development. So an important concept in the pathway to violence is to not take it literally in terms of the sequence of events that are laid out. And so it's important to look for those as milestones along the pathway versus concrete steps, like going up a linear staircase. So the first component of it, the grievance, this is the broadest base. The good news about people with grievances is most are never violent or significantly disruptive before. Virtually all of us from time to time develops grievances about aspects of the people around us, our jobs, our family situations, life in general.
Happens all the time. Right, when you think about what is the definition of a grievance, right? It's a real or perceived wrong. Now, does everyone take a grievance and it goes further into violent ideation, planning, preparation, etc.? No, that's much less common. When you don't understand the cause for that person, why are they doing what they're doing, you don't know whether there was a place to intervene, right? Whether it's a mental health issue, right? Whether they've suffered a significant loss recently, whether they're under a significant number of multiple stressors have just kind of been piling on, and there was this place where they feel like, you know what, this is kind of my only option. You don't know that there isn't anything you can do if you don't know what the actual problem is.
Lots of people have bad experiences, grievances, and let it go and move on. But a sense of fixation on the grievance or the need for resolution is an indication that this is a grievance that's a bit different than normal. So the next step is the ideation for the use of violence. And there's a lot of influences on this. Again, when there's the fixation on either the grievance or the need for resolution or the thoughts about resolution through violent means, that's a concern-enhancing aspect of the ideation. The person who obsesses and ruminates and continues to invest effort of thought and action moving forward to that typically begins to think on a bit more grander scale. As we look at the tipping point between the idea to the action, the planning is really about the who, what, when, and where. The why come from the first two stages. Who would best satisfy who or what would most satisfy my fantasies? And then when I'm going to take action, who's available to me and are they vulnerable? The preparatory stage is preparing the capability, which involves both the skill and the will. The other things that are important in the preparatory stage is acquiring the means to fulfill the plan. Lots of us make plans and don't have the resources, the skills, or the will to implement the plan. And so what would be necessary? Do you need locks and chains to secure doors, to limit egress so there's more victims stay available to me for a longer period of time, or to limit emergency services ingress so I've got more time? For me, the probing and the breaching is part of the attack, and certainly the reason for breaking out in the model is that there are some people that will do a preliminary probe or attempt to breach. So that's part of what the probing is testing the security. You know how far you can get. You know whether the guard really checks your security badge when you're coming through, whether there's a metal detector or not.
Understanding the potential indicators of those who may be along the pathway to violence is important. But are there cases that show how reporting these behaviors have any effect?
There's a whole database of them. So the U.S. Department of Justice has funded, it's now available online, the beginnings of it, and it is a collection of circumstances where individuals were expressing the ideation and developing the capacity to engage in acts of significant violence in schools and campuses and a few other workplaces, but the focus of the research through the Police Foundation is on schools and campuses, mostly schools, K through 12 schools. What we're finding is that there are literally hundreds of these cases.
With an understanding of behavioral indicators, what can organizations do to mitigate potential violent acts?
Warnings and indicators is really what I think the question is. Individually, each one of these things do not add up to a threat, so to speak, but when they are put together in a collective, it gives you more confidence, perhaps, that there's something more to be looked at. What you don't want to do is create a system wherein anonymous information can come in without context, or you encourage people to report observations that are out of the ordinary, and then they go into a black hole, there's no feedback, and worse yet, that there would be no action. I use an acronym called VIEW, V-I-E-W. And I think it's reasonable, I think it's fair, and I think it fits in both worlds. So the V would be vigilance, all right? So every employee from the top down, regardless of the size of the organization, has to understand what normal looks like. That's called situational awareness. So that's the V. The I in my acronym stands for introspection. That's the ability to understand when changes to normal might be occurring. The E I use to represent engagement. That could mean fostering a mechanism that enables individuals to report when they see things that aren't in that normal status. And then the W I use to remind people about willingness to act. And that's probably where the biggest gap occurs in my mind. I think we do a decent job now because of the see something, say something paradigm. Individuals are encouraged and often empowered to report things, but what we do about it thereafter is what happens. So that willingness to act, operationalizing and putting action into that is really the key follow-on, so that when somebody says something, you might be the one that has to do something.
For more information and resources, please visit dhs.gov/hometownsecurity. There you can...
So I want to capitalize on the very last thing that he said. When someone says something, you might be the one that has to do something about it. You all are the eyes and ears of our community, and we absolutely rely on you sharing that information with us. Whenever these incidents happen, the news media generally doesn't have any difficulty finding people to interview that will say things like, you know, I noticed this weird change in behavior, but I didn't say anything. Or I noticed that they started to do this different thing or post weird things online, and I didn't tell anyone, I didn't say anything. And that's just, it's a tragedy, because that information could have potentially been used to intervene. So I hope that you got something out of that video. Those of you that came in late, you happen to miss it, if you just Google Pathway to Violence video, it's one of the first things that comes up from the United States Department of Homeland Security. All right, avoid, deny, defend. We're going to talk about these things. So denial, how do we get through denial on an active shooter or active attack situation? Well, we've got to recognize what gunfire sounds like. So the next time I press my magic button, you're going to hear a series of gunfire. This is the only time after today that I'm going to give you permission to not do anything about the gunfire that you're about to hear. All right? So there's about to be gunfire. It's going to startle somebody. So what kind of gun was that? It was an automatic of some kind, a semi-automatic weapon. It was not a shotgun, because it made this clanking sound immediately after the trigger was pulled and the gun fired. So what is happening is this is a replica. There's a blue gun, it's plastic, there's no hole. Well, actually there is a hole, but I promise this is not a real gun, so don't be offended if I point it at you. This is a semi-automatic Glock pistol. It's basically a replica of the one that's on my hip. This thing up here on the top is called the slide, all right? And this thing goes back and forth. If there's a bullet in the chamber, I pull the trigger and the gunpowder that's inside explodes. It causes this slide to come back. And when it comes back, the magazine that's seated in this part of the gun has lots of other bullets inside of it, and when it goes back forward, it injects another round into the chamber. Why do I tell you that? Because as Mr. Shaw saw from the beginning, he talked about when the guy reloaded his clip or his magazine, or he was messing with his gun, that was an opportunity for him. If you see someone at a shooting range that knows what they're doing with a weapon, they will have the weapon up near the front of their face. They'll eject the magazine here, get another magazine, reload it, and get back into business very, very quickly. Somebody that doesn't know what they're doing with a weapon like this is likely to bend down, look at it down here, not be paying attention to what's going on in their surroundings. And if you see someone that's messing with their weapon like this, whether or not it be a handgun or it be a long gun, that's the perfect opportunity to attack them, because they're giving you a sign that they don't know what they're doing. They're not as familiar with the weapon system that they're operating. One of the things that we know about a lot of these attackers is that they will go and acquire a weapon soon, contemporaneously to when they're going to commit their attack, and they aren't that familiar with it. This is the same Glock I've been shooting ever since I've been a cop. It's a different one, but it's basically the same. It works the same, so I'm very familiar with how it functions. A lot of muscle memory built into it. Lots of times attackers that use this don't happen to have that same familiarity. So it's good for you to have some basic knowledge of how weapon systems work. Don't do this, folks. This is a recipe to become an unnecessary victim. Hiding under a desk, hiding under a church pew is just, unfortunately, an invitation for the wolf to come and bite you. Okay? Don't do this. And we see it again and again and again after every single one of these incidents. So don't hide and hope. This is an actual active shooter incident that occurred in Panama City Beach, Florida in 2010. We're going to watch this and look at several aspects, but I want you to be thinking about situational awareness when when you watch and listen to this.
And for the technology, you'll notice it's on the chart that you have there, and it's part of the plan that we have, that the workshop we're going to have following this meeting, but this will be the first step in that whole process. I have a motion. Everybody in this room. Counter. Hit the road.
How many of you have attended meetings of various kinds? Have you ever attended a meeting and had somebody come in and spray paint on the wall and think that something maybe good will come after that? Right? So I'm a cop. I have been privileged to rise to the rank of a chief of police. Let me tell you what we call what just happened, ladies and gentlemen. It's a clue. It's a clue that things are about to go badly. And they are. So he's come in, he's interrupted this school board meeting, he's spray painted on the wall, and what's in his right hand? A gun, okay? What are people doing? Sitting. There is one good example right here. Watch the lady in the green. She kind of blends in because the seats are green, but watch her, okay? Things are going to happen pretty quickly. Now watch these two ladies, watch this lady. All right, ladies, earlier I gave you a pass. Now we're going to flip the tables a little bit, okay? Sorry, I actually didn't mean to say that before then. Thank you for continuing to watch. Actually, we're going to go back and watch that one more time. Forgot about that. Okay, so watch the lady in the green, for those of you that didn't happen to see her. She does a really good job. Now let's look at these two ladies here and this one. But then watch very carefully for a lady to come up from behind. She's going to hit him with her purse. Okay, so I've got two ladies that did something really good and three ladies that did things that were not so good. So the lady in the green, she did the best that she had with the hand she was dealt. She was too far away from the shooter to engage in a defend strategy or a fight strategy. She couldn't go up and attack him, and she probably would have gotten shot if she would have tried to do that because she was in the third row. So she got down low, she crawled away from him, was constantly looking back, and then she exits toward the center of the aisle. These two ladies that are closest to us in the first seats here, they gather all their belongings, get their purse, their coat, their notebooks. They get everything that they have. The other lady that's over here behind the desk, she steps up. She's a very kind Southern woman, I'm sure, and pushes in her chair. And then they kind of file out orderly. Not good avoid or deny strategies, not quick. Now, a lot of people laugh because of the other woman who comes up behind the suspect and hits him with her purse. Now, while that by itself might not necessarily be a good strategy, you know who I'm super upset with? These two, right here. Because that was their opportunity to jump on that guy. I mean, tackle him for all that they were worth. And it probably would have worked if they would have helped. But unfortunately, they did not. So, avoid. If you're going to avoid or engage in a run strategy, what that means is you're trying to get away from the shooter. So if you're going to run like you have never run before, all right? And, people ask, well, which way should I run? Away from the sound of the gunfire. That's the best thing that I can tell you. Keep your hands visible. What we're talking about there is, if it's been some time since this has started, who's coming? We are coming. And when we're coming in, we're trying to figure out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. So you can help us by keeping your hands up and visible. We'll talk more about that later. Know your exits at this point is kind of a dead horse. I told you that was one of the most important things in the presentation. Leave unnecessary belongings behind and call 911 when it's safe to do so. So deny. This is the number one data-driven solution to surviving an active shooter incident, is getting behind a locked door. Remember when we talked about the motive of the suspect? They want to kill as many people as possible in as short a period of time as possible. So when they come to a locked door, they are not going to spend the time to try to defeat that door and get behind it, with one exception, and that is if their intended target is behind that door and they know it. That's the only way that they'll do it. Otherwise, they're just going to bypass it and move on. So if you can get behind a locked door, that is the number one data-driven solution for surviving. If the door doesn't lock, or even if it does, go ahead and barricade it. The more you can put up against that door, the better. The heavier, the better. You can utilize door stops. Where can I get a door stop? Anybody that's got a saw and a 2x4 can make a door stop. They're very, very easy to make. SWAT operators will carry door stops like that to put in a door when they can't leave somebody behind a door to keep it from opening behind them. Those kinds of door stops work very well. The top is a commercially available product. Some campuses have installed things like that in their buildings for these kinds of situations when they have to go into a lockdown or lockout situation. These are some other creative solutions. So these are called tactical cinches. These are the door closure mechanisms that we've all seen. A lot of people, when I show them this, they're like, I wonder if that works. It works. I've tried it. If you have a good one of those mechanisms that's secured well to the door and you wrap it tightly, it won't open, or it'll at least be very difficult to open. So that's called a tactical cinch. Here, what's happened is they've taken these printers and they've tied the data cable and the power cable to this handle, and that door opens away. So could a person get that door open? Yes, but it's going to be hard, and it's probably going to pull those big, heavy printers off in front of them. So that's a pretty creative solution that they came up with there on the fly. We're about to watch a video of the shooting from White Settlement Church. If any of you might not be okay with that, now would be a good time to leave or look away. There is a shooting. You'll see 2 people get shot. There's not a lot of blood. It's not super gory, but I do want to give folks the opportunity to not watch if they don't want to. So the purpose of watching this is to, again, review the avoid, deny, defend strategies that are used and how effective that they are. So for those of you that don't know, where you want to start your attention is up here in this area. The shooter is actually this subject that's right behind the dot, and he's going to get up and go talk to this gentleman. As the video progresses, I want you to watch this lady here. This lady can't be a day older than 25, but she actually does a really, really good job in terms of how she responds to the situation. There's some other folks right over here that do a good job as well, and there's plenty of bad examples. So there's a lot to watch here, but do your best. So do you see lots of examples there? Unfortunately, we do have a number of people that just get under the pews. That turns out to be okay here because we have this gentleman who is an absolute hero, Mr. Wilson. He is he's a civilian. He's on the church's security team there, and you probably saw the interviews of him. He did just an absolutely phenomenal job. That man is also a firearms instructor. So this is a time when I like to address a topic that if I don't address, it'll definitely come up in the Q&A. And that's for those of you that may have a license to carry, or those of you that might be armed, and you want to know, what do I do in a situation if I'm ever in one? And this is my answer. If you can shoot like that guy, take care of business. But you have to know your own limitations, okay? That's very, very important. If you happen to be one of those who the last time you shot was years ago when you actually got your license to carry, you're responsible for every piece of lead that comes out of the end of that barrel, just like we are. So you have to know what your limitations are. You can shoot like that guy and you accurately identify the threat, absolutely. We will be more than happy to accept your assistance. I assure you. But that's what you have to think about. We'll talk a little bit more about LTC holders later on. Give you one more opportunity to watch this. We're going to skip that one for time. Defend. I need my volunteer assistant. Where you at, Todd? Come on up here, Todd. This is Lieutenant Todd Udy. He is going to come up here and assist me with this. So if you're going to engage in a defend or fight strategy, so like you heard the police chief from the University of North Carolina talk about Riley Howell. He said he didn't have an opportunity to run or hide or avoid or deny. He had to engage in a defend or fight strategy because of how close he was. So that's what we're going to demonstrate here. What I want you to kind of simulate is that there's a wall right here that I was able to basically just run behind, but I don't have anywhere else to go, and I know he's coming. I don't have a door I can lock. I know that he's coming. And what we're trying to simulating here are these two gentlemen that are in camo, so you can't see them up in the picture. But we're kind of going to demonstrate the same thing that we've got. So Todd is searching for me, and like most people, whenever they are searching for victims, they've got the gun up in front of them, and they're looking. So he's coming down this hallway, but I know he's coming, and I'm getting ready. And as soon as I see that gun come into view, I reach out and I grab a hold of it like this. And I've got both my hands as strong as I can. Not in the trigger guard. Beautiful. So then I've got a hold of it really good. I'm going to bring it in here. Why am I going to bring it in here? Because I'm much stronger having brought my arms inside than if we're wrestling with the gun out here. Plus, if we're wrestling with the gun out here and he turns it in this direction, I'm going to get shot, and I don't want that to happen. So I've grabbed a hold of the gun, I bring it in here close to my body, and then I'm just going to pivot away as hard as I possibly can. Simple, okay? I can't make you experts in how to disarm somebody in a seminar like this. We could put down mats, we could have a lot of fun and some bruises, but it would be a good time. And you could learn more about how to do this. You can take courses on your own, but that's a strategy. The point is if you're going to engage in a strategy like that, you have to have the right mindset and seize that opportunity. So here is an example of exactly this. This is from a university up in Washington. Why did it stop? Sorry, let's try this again. Here we go. It's from a university up in Washington. This guy that disarms him is a resident assistant. He walks into the residence hall here, and look at him in reference to what I was saying earlier about not being familiar with his weapon system. He's got a shotgun, and he's looking straight down at it. He's not paying attention to what's going on around him. This gentleman comes out, Mr. Meese, and the first thing he does is spray him with pepper spray as he is running at him. Because he's by himself like this, and it's a long gun, he takes one hand to the gun and takes the other hand up around his head, takes him down to the ground. The guy is stunned. He does not even know what just happened. And then Mr. Meese comes back and gets on top of him until police show up. Absolute hero. Here's another hero for you, Lieutenant Brian Murphy. He was a police officer up in Wisconsin at the Sikh temple that was attacked. He was shot 15 times in the parking lot. And this was his mindset. I'm not going out in a parking lot. I'm not going out like this. I'm not going to let my wife down. I'm not going to let my daughter down. I'm not letting my stepkids down. So these were all reasons for living, just like the Columbine caller had. He just translated it into action instead of inaction. We're going to quickly look at Virginia Tech as a case study for the successful and unsuccessful application of some run, hide, fight strategies. So if you don't recall, this is Norris Hall, where the actual shooting occurred. You see those big, heavy wooden doors. What the suspect did when he came inside is he chained those doors together. That was to keep victims from being able to get out and keep police from being able to come in. This is the second floor where the shooting happened, typical college hallway with classrooms off to each side. And then these are the 5 rooms that the suspect went into. So we're going to look at this graph. Room 206 is where the shooting started. Unfortunately, in this room, the victims did not have much time to prepare. The suspect came inside and he started shooting. So there's a lot of casualties and a lot of fatalities in that room. Room 211 was unfortunately not the second room that he went to. It was actually the third room. And what we had in here was a bad strategy and bad leadership. We had somebody say they heard the gunshots from next door and they said, we need to call 911. So you've got a classroom full of people on the phone, none of which engaging in an avoid, deny, or defend strategy. And unfortunately, every single person in that room was shot. About 65% of them died. In room 207, we see the first significant loss of life. Room 207 and 206 are similar in that the suspect came in, shot people, left, and then came back. In room 206, he was able to walk right back inside and shoot more people. In room 207, when he left, they said, we've had enough of you, and those that were able-bodied went over and actually barricaded the door with their bodies. They held up against the door, and he wasn't able to get in the second time. So that's why you see the significant reduction in loss of life in room 207. Room 204, we have another American hero, Professor Liviu Librescu. This man had survived the Holocaust, so he was extremely familiar with what gunfire sounded like. As soon as he heard what the gunfire, he told his students, that's gunfire, you have to jump out the window. Remember, this is on the second floor. The good news with this is that was a pretty serious avoid strategy or a run strategy, but every single person that jumped out the window survived. Unfortunately, he was a small man, and he was trying to barricade the door himself. The suspect was able to overpower him and pushed in, so that's why there are still some casualties there, but not that many. And in room 205, there are absolutely no casualties. What do you think they were able to successfully do? Barricade the door. They kept the suspect from being able to get inside. So folks, this whole presentation should go to show you that you're absolutely not helpless if one of these things happens to you. And what you do or what you don't do is critically important. You have to take the life-saving action. This is a quick overview of our overall strategy. When the attack starts, is your primary exit strategy available, that plan A that your brain automatically gives you? If that's available, then you're going to use it, and you're going to engage in an avoid strategy and run out. If it's not available, then you're going to deny the suspect access to your location. You're going to barricade that door, lock that door. While you are barricaded or locking the door, you are also going to be thinking, is there any other way I can get out of here? Is there another plan B strategy? If there is, then you're going to use it and you're going to avoid. If not, then you're going to prepare to fight and think about, how am I going to disarm this person? What weapons can I improvise? Things like that. All right, when the police arrive. So we're back to the active shooter situation at Panama City Beach. And what I want you to look here, and this is very relevant for our community, right? We've got the Forney Police Department, we've got within Forney, the Constable's Office, we've got Kaufman County Sheriff's Department, lots of different police agencies. We wear different uniforms, we drive different cars. So I want you to look at all the different police that respond here and how they're dressed.
Anybody else injured? No, everybody's okay.
So there you see police officers are wearing a little bit of everything. Only one person that showed up there is actually in uniform. If you've noticed as you walk around, several of the folks that I get to work with every day, they're in uniform. Some of them are wearing a polo shirt with a badge and a gun on the side. They look different. Our uniforms look different. But generally we've got some kind of marking on. When police arrive to a situation like this, I can absolutely guarantee you we've been given probably 50 different descriptions of what the suspect looks like. So whatever description that we're given is practically meaningless. We are looking for what? Weapons, somebody with a weapon. So this is where those of you who are thinking about, okay, I'm an LTC holder or I'm armed, what do I do? You don't want to look like a suspect when we come around the corner. You don't want to look like a suspect when we come around the corner. And some people will say, well, you know, I shot him and I gotta hold my gun on him. If his chest is not rising and falling, you can put it away. I promise, he's not going to get back up. This is the universal sign to a police officer that you are not a threat. Hands up, palms forward, fingers spread. And I deliberately tucked my little clicker away so that all you see are hands. This is what we need to see to accurately identify, okay, this thing that's at the other end of my Glock is not a threat. How well did they do in terms of responding to the commands that officers gave? Not super well, right? If I'm pointing my Glock at you and I tell you to get on the ground, don't go shopping for a mattress. Get flat as quickly as you possibly can. The longer you take, the more my mind is asking, why is he not doing what I'm telling him to do? So help us out with that, okay? All right. We talked about all that. Priority of the work. This applies not only for police, but also for all of our public safety partners. The first thing we're going to do is go to the sound of that gunfire or the source of the killing, and we're going to try to address that. We will bypass all victims, folks that are unfortunately taking their last breath, gasping out in pain, whatever. We will bypass all of them to try to get to the threat because we have to stop the killing. As soon as we accomplish that, we will then transition into stopping the dying. And we will partner with our friends from CareFlite, from the fire department, to try and get medical personnel inside like I described earlier. But it's going to be chaotic. The best thing that you can do, how many of you are parents, have kids in school? The absolute best thing that you can do if an active shooter situation is reported at your child's school is to not go there. Here is why. And folks, if this doesn't ring true in your brain, because you can say, man, screw that, I'm going. Here's the deal. If your kid happens to have a hole in his or her body, what piece of equipment do you want to be able to get to your kid and get out of there quickly? Their ambulance or their helicopter. If all of you come, you're going to bring what? Vehicles that block roadways. We don't have any traffic problems in Forney. But when you show up and you block all the roadways and then they can't get there and they can't get out, that can cost lives. It's all about time. Remember what I said. All right, folks, you have listened to me talk for plenty of time. You know, this whole process of public safety is absolutely a team sport. Here in the audience tonight, right over here, was Chief Whitaker from, oh, there he is, back there in the back. He came from Crandall Police Department and is showing his support. We've got members of CareFlite over here. The Forney Fire Department is here. Everything that we do in public safety is a team sport, and we can't do any of this alone. So it's my absolute privilege to turn the presentation over now to Doug Schlitz. He's a CareFlite paramedic. This gentleman is 8 years paramedic, 3 with CareFlite. A 12-year combat and flight medic from the U.S. Army, and he's an instructor in multiple areas, including stop the bleed, pre-hospital trauma and life support, and tactical combat casualty care. You're going to learn a lot from him. Please give Doug your attention. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks. Is this working? Excellent. So, bleeding control, right? No one should die from uncontrolled bleeding. The most common preventable cause of death in trauma is massive hemorrhage. In the Army, we've been treating this and making sure that this is treated immediately in our soldiers since about 2007, 2008. A little bit before that, some of the guys who wear funny hats and they blur out their faces in all the pictures, those guys started that stuff in our special operations community. So we found that tourniquets and stopping the bleeding is what saves lives. And unfortunately, in our society is becoming a little bit more violent. And even if it wasn't, knowing how to control bleeding with either a tourniquet or packing a wound is important, extremely important. Who here works with power tools? Right? All right. The last time I applied a tourniquet was on a person who was working with a chop saw, and it bounced off the thing and caught him across the inside of his arm. Massive bleeding, no trauma, no gunshots were fired, but we got on scene, and he had a towel pressed on it. So if I can tell you one thing to start this, that if you're going to put something in a wound or on a wound, a towel or washcloth is not the thing to put on there. Why? They're designed to absorb, right? So absorbing is not what we want to do. A t-shirt, right? Gauze, anything. A t-shirt works great. T-shirts aren't made to absorb unless you got one of those Under Armour moisture wicking ones, and then, well, you should buy a different t-shirt to carry with you. So that's the first thing I'll say right here. And then we'll move on to the tourniquets, all right? It's the #1 cause of death. You can bleed out from a leg bleed, from a femoral injury, in about 3 to 5 minutes. If you remember back when Chief told you what's the typical response time for police, all right? And then the typical time to EMS arrival and fire arrival is right around 5 to 7 minutes nationwide. In a smaller area, if you're in an urban area, it gets there a little quicker. But if you look at those time considerations and that comparison, you all need to be able to stop bleeding. By the time I get there, if that patient hasn't had any bleeding control done, there's very little I can do for a massive bleed like that. All right, your safety comes first. All right, that's the most important thing. We teach ourselves from all the way back to when we become EMTs. Scene safety, right? We learn BSI and make sure the scene is safe. In this situation especially, right, the run, hide, fight mentality, unfortunately, when you try to help someone, you're doing none of those three, are you? Right? Even when we work we talked about a rescue task force concept. When we do that, we wait until we have an area that is warm that we can work our way into so that we're safe. Move the victim and yourself to a safe area if you can, and if you have gloves, wear them. Most important first, so now you're talking about actually stopping the bleeding. Locate where it's at. Most of the time you're not going to see it. I've seen a lot of traumatic wounds, a lot of traumatic amputations, and finding the wound is very difficult. If you can expose the wound, that's the first thing you want to do. Tear the shirt, tear the pants, right? Don't worry about anybody's privacy. You're trying to save their life. And then locate that life-threatening bleeding. If you can't do that, then the next thing we will do is then you're going to use what's called a combat applied tourniquet, and you're going to apply it as high on that extremity as you possibly can, all the way up into the groin, all the way up into the armpit, and you're going to continue to turn that tourniquet, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, until the bleeding stops, right? That is a hasty tourniquet. It's used in a situation just like that when you can't see where the bleeding is coming from. Like Micah said, you can have a tourniquet on for anywhere near over 2 hours. It used to be when I first was trained as an EMT, we thought if you put a tourniquet on, that limb is just going to basically disintegrate and fall off, right? It's not true. They've been using tourniquets in surgery for 8, 10, 12 hours for decades now. So we know that a tourniquet can be placed, and even longer than 6 hours we've had tourniquets in place. These are things you're looking for life-threatening bleeding, right? Clothing that is soaked in blood, right? Because clothing will absorb a lot of blood. If that whole pant leg is soaked, you can assume that there is a great deal of bleeding coming from underneath it, right? If you can't open it, if you can't expose the wound, what are we going to do? Tourniquet where? High and tight. Excellent. If you see blood that's squirting or pooling, right? We used to say if it's an arterial bleed, we put a tourniquet on it. It's not true anymore. You can die just as much when your vein gets cut as when an artery gets cut, right? Same thing. Look for that squirting or pooling blood. Large pools of blood are, a definite sign of bleeding. Partial or complete amputation of a limb, right? You're not going to see that in a lot of cases, but what was one of the tools of these mass violence perpetrators, right, is bombs, explosives. a lot of these active shooter situations or these mass violence incidents, though they use explosives in them as well to do damage afterwards, or sometimes to place it to hurt people responding, like the police and fire and EMS. Then you're going to look for large amounts of blood and a confused victim. If that victim is confused, it's a sign that the patient is going into shock. And if they're going into shock, that means they've probably lost a pretty good amount of blood already. So if you see bleeding and large amount of shock or confused victim, find out where that bleeding is coming from, apply that tourniquet. The 3 steps. The first thing you're going to do is apply direct pressure, right? Who's taken a kind of a basic first aid class? Right? How many of you are told that direct pressure means to take your hand and push it on that wound? Right? That is not how you apply direct pressure in this case. And some of you may be squeamish, but in this situation, you're not going to be able to be. Direct pressure means, especially with a penetrating trauma, since we're talking about active shooter, is digits inside of bodies. You're going to put your finger into the wound, and you're going to find where that vessel is actually damaged, and you're going to push that vessel against something. It helps. You could be nice and you could say, I'm so sorry, this is going to hurt a lot. That is what I do, but it's going to save their life. All right, that's the direct pressure we're talking about. Get something to push on that vessel to hold it in place. Now, at this point, you may need some help, right? Or you're going to have to use the other hand to be working on a dressing. We go through a ton of training in how to pack a wound, and that's a whole class on its own, and we will talk about where to get that training, and we're going to start offering that kind of training, stopping the bleeding with packing wounds and things like that, with like quick clot or some of these hemostatic agents that are designed to help clotting and stop bleeding. But you're going to put that in, you're going to pack that into the wound as best you can, and then hold pressure on it. That pressure doesn't have to be your hand anymore at this point. If you can wrap something around it, an ace wrap, something stretchy, something with Velcro on it, hold that in place to hold that pressure on the wound. If it continues to bleed through that single dressing that you've put on, what are you going to do then? Put a tourniquet on. Excellent. And then the last thing is, if it looks too bad to put a wound dressing on, or if the bleeding looks too severe to put the dressing on, apply a tourniquet immediately, right? If that patient didn't need a tourniquet, especially in these mass violence incidents, if they didn't need a tourniquet and we get there and we get everyone triaged and we've already worked through our patients and we've already fixed anybody whose life is threatened and we don't need that tourniquet on, we can take it off. Or we can just get them in the hospital and then the doctors can take it off. So look at that, it's almost like I knew it was there, right? So apply continuous pressure by placing both hands over the wound or inside of the wound. And by direct pressure, that's hard. You can put your whole body weight into it. That's okay, right? The patient's not going to like it or the person's not going to like it. But again, you can apologize the entire time. All right, push down hard and then hold it there for about 3 minutes, or find something else that can put that pressure on if you have other people that need your hands, right? Because in these situations where it's mass violence, there could be more than one person that you need to do this for. There we go. Large wound, pack with cloth or dressing inside, and then apply more pressure. All right? This is important, right? Never place inside the chest, stomach, or back area. So we kind of call it the box, right? What would be the problem with trying to pack anywhere in this box with fabric or cloth or a dressing? It's hollow, right? Kind of like my head, my wife says. So don't pack my head with a dressing either. But it will just continue to go. If you have a patient and they have a wound in that area, what we are most worried about then is the second most common cause of death, and that's going to be an airway or a breathing situation, right? If a patient is shot in one of those areas, all you're going to do is take a hand, put it on it, and hold it as tight as you can. If you have a glove, that would be excellent. If you have a piece of plastic to put over the hole, that would be even better. And just hold it there until help arrives. All right, that will prevent what they call, I mean, any of you have ever seen any of the, war movies or anything, that sucking chest wound, right? That's what we use to prevent that. There we go. So now, most of it's going to be caused or controlled by this point. At this point, if it didn't work, it's time to use a tourniquet. All right? Ride it high. It's going to go as high in the extremity as possible. right? They used to talk about 2 inches over the wound and not over a joint, things like that, and that's wonderful. But the fact is that when things start happening and your adrenaline level is up here, you're not going to remember, you're not going to be able to find it. Most of the time these wounds are extremely ugly, so that little wound that's right here could have pulled the whole back flap of skin off in the back. Not to be graphic, but unfortunately it's a graphic subject. So you may put a tourniquet on just above that wound, but then you missed all the stuff back here and it's still bleeding. All right, I've got some assistants and they're going to be kind of walking around here and they'll kind of spread through the crowd to show you this next section. And then after the whole presentation, we will allow you guys to mess with these tourniquets over in the room next door. There you go. Notice how they're always putting it. The other reason that we put it way up high is that there's only one bone in the tops of our arms and the tops of our legs, right? The idea is to put enough pressure to push that vessel against a bone and constrict it so it's completely occluded. By doing this, keeping it up high, it's much easier. That little vessel that you're trying to squeeze can't hide between the bones in your ankles or your wrists. Only arms and legs, right? If it's a head wound, don't put it on the neck, though I'm sure there's some people out there that you'd want to try one for. If the bleeding doesn't stop with the first tourniquet, put a second one on. One of the things that I'll tell you, the biggest, most common reason that it didn't stop with that first tourniquet is you didn't tighten it enough. Again, just like I told you that this is going to be a very painful experience when you put that direct pressure in that wound, this tourniquet, I know a lot of people that I've treated who've been shot, and they said, this is almost more painful when I put it on than getting shot. It hurts. It should hurt. It's that pinching sensation. And you're going to continue to turn until that bleeding stops or you can't turn anymore. Here we go. Hopefully that'll play.
Welcome to the CAT Tourniquet video tutorial, one-handed application to upper extremity. Insert the wounded limb through the loop formed by the band. Apply tourniquet proximal to the bleeding site. Pull the band tight and securely fasten the band back on itself. Adhere the band around the limb. Do not adhere past the rod clip. Twist the rod until bright red bleeding has stopped and the distal pulse is eliminated. Place the rod inside the clip, locking it in place. Check for bleeding and absence of distal pulse. Adhere the band over the rod, inside the clip, and fully around the limb. Secure the rod and band with the strap. Prepare the patient for transport and reassess. For more information about the CAT Tourniquet or any NAR products, please visit www.narescue.com or call 888-689-6277.
All right. And about how long should that take you? Anybody I know there's some veterans here who's been trained with a tourniquet. How long does it have to be on in? 15 to 30 seconds, right? That is what the standard we train to in the military. I won't say which branch, because I don't want to start any fights. All right? So you're going to wrap that tourniquet around the injured arm or leg. You're going to run the strap through the buckle. Who in this room carries a tourniquet? All right, good. Where's my nearest? Right here, right here. Okay, cool. When was the last time you used your tourniquet? Have you practiced with it? It isn't. So CAT Tourniquet will tell you how to find these later. But if you carry one, so just like Chief Butt was saying, that if you're not going to learn to shoot the gun unless you shoot the gun. If you do not use this over and over and over again in practice, you're not going to do it when you need to. So in conjunction to that, what I'm going to say is you do not want to use the tourniquet that you carry for practice because you're only supposed to use them once. Hopefully, you will never have to use it. So I would suggest getting an extra one, not an extra one of these super expensive ones, because unfortunately, these tourniquets are expensive when you buy them. If you're not paying $30-ish for a tourniquet, you're not getting a good tourniquet. These ones that we're practicing with here, about $6 a piece. So get one of these, practice with it, and use that as your practice tourniquet, and then have a real one that you'll use at home. So, run the strap through the buckle. It should be carried just like this, right? It doesn't do any good in the plastic packaging inside of its, little container. Buckle, have it run through, because whether you have to put it around an arm or a leg, it'll still fit most of the time. And if you're putting it on a leg, you can undo the buckle a lot quicker than you can do the buckle under stress. All right? Pull the free end through. Pull it as tight as you can. If you do it right, you will almost occlude all of that circulation with just that pull. My hand will start to turn blue in a second. And then twist the rod until the bleeding stops. Like I said, these ones are very inexpensive tourniquets. It's working. And then secure it. The other common mistake I see with people who carry tourniquets is you carry it like this. The more steps you put in between you and this windlass and tightening it, the more time you have for somebody to bleed out. So if you carry one, again, I suggest take it out of the package, keep this like that, and it will be a lot easier to use. All right, I'm going to change the slide and then work on this too. Get this off so I have some circulation left. All right. Do not remove it once applied. If you put it on, leave it on. Right? Leave taking it off to a medical professional. Like I said, we may decide that patient doesn't need it, that the blood that you put it on for was from someone else, not that patient. Right? But that's okay, because we don't want you to be trying to figure out and determine which patient needs what. If you're going to improvise a tourniquet, first of all, my biggest suggestion is don't, right? Have a real tourniquet. But if you're not going to carry it with you, or you're going to have it in your car or not in your pocket, then improvising one is okay. The key is it has to be about 2 inches wide, right? Anything skinnier than that will not compress the tissue enough to get the vessel. All it's going to do is compress that tissue enough to cause tissue damage. So those little skinny 1-inch tourniquets, I've heard people try to say use a piece of electrical wire, right, or a power cord. If that's all you have, go for it, but I'd rather use something else. And then a rod or a stick, anything that is solid that won't snap. Okay? And you're going to place it the same way, as high and tight as you can. You're going to turn it until the bleeding stops, and then you're going to have to tie off that tourniquet. I went backwards. My bad. Afterwards, place the patient on the side. There's a reason for this other than it's a recovery position, but the recovery position is wonderful because the hand is protecting the head. Their airway is open, right? So we know they're open. But what else does that tell the providers that are coming in after this? That patient's been looked at, right? Somebody helped that person. Because most of the time, I sleep like this, but that's not the position I'm going to fall to if somebody hits me with a bullet. Bleeding control kits. All right, Texas is passing legislature that these have to be in every school. It's important that you carry one, right? Like I said, this is just not for a mass violence incident or a multiple victim casualty type situation. This could be something as simple as working around the house. The bleeding kits, the commercial one will treat about 8 to 10 victims. It's about the size of an AED. And usually, if you have one in your place of business, keep it near the AED, because then all of your emergency supplies, emergency equipment is in one place. The basic bleeding kits are for 1 to 2 people. That's the kind that you can carry in your car, carry in a little, keep somewhere in the kitchen or in the shop if you have a shop. So here's where you get these things. All right, North American Rescue is one of the biggest providers of emergency or combat equipment. They got all sorts of cool stuff. You could pack your whole car with all sorts of neat stuff and spend thousands and thousands of dollars. But they sit right around $28 to $30 for one tourniquet. All right, like I said, I don't recommend, in fact, I would say don't go onto Amazon and find the 10 tourniquets for $20 deal like I did for these. Get a good tourniquet. Remember, your life depends on it, right? I wouldn't buy a cheap parachute, right? I won't buy one of those, those really cheap guns that has a tendency to blow up in my face. I'm not going to buy a cheap tourniquet. And then you can go to that bleedingcontrol.org. They have a store that sells them as well. And free Stop the Bleed training. I am as well as being a paramedic here in Kaufman County, I had just took a kind of a promotion. Somehow I'm working more and making less, but whatever. I'm the educator for the county. I do all the continuing education for all of our fire departments. I help do some of the stuff with the police department, and I do our community outreach. So if your church or your school is interested in a small Stop the Bleed class, because obviously in a room full of 300 people, I can't give you a certification. I can't train everyone one-on-one to use this equipment. But in a small class at your church or your school, or shoot, if you just got a club that you want to have, this class at, let me know. I will make sure somehow you can have my email. And if not, you could always call CareFlite and ask for me. Just call the commercial number, not the one with 3 numbers. Don't call that one. If you call there and ask for Doug, they're going to frown on that. All right, and then we can come out, and it's about a 2.5 to 3 hour class. You'll get to practice it. You'll get to practice packing wounds. You'll get to practice putting on a tourniquet over and over and over again, because one of the super important things is that as soon as our adrenaline level hits here, our brain stops working and our hands stop working. So unless you've turned this into muscle memory, it's not going to be very effective. Where'd Chief go? There he is. All right, coming back up.
Folks, give it up for Doug.
Now, like we said, we're going to take some questions. Any of you, if you don't have questions and would like to mess with these tourniquets, my assistants are going to go right behind this wall into that little area of the gym over on this, my right, your left. And you can go mess with these over there.
Let's give Doug a round of applause. Absolutely. And another one of our public safety partners has just joined us. Chief Rick Townsend of the Forney Fire Department is right over here. Many of you probably know him. We certainly appreciate him being here and supporting us as well. Pastor Hancock is going to help us out with our question and answer session. The way that this works generally best is if you have a question that you would like for Doug or I to answer, if you'll just come up here and Pastor Hancock will give you the microphone and let you ask your question, and then that way everybody can hear it, and we'll answer. If you need to leave, we will not be upset at all. It's getting late in the evening. We certainly appreciate all of you for coming, and we'll go ahead and move into our Q&A. Here's our first victim.
On the graph that you had up there with the dots that came up,
yes, sir.
One after the other, 300 and some odd attacks. Any idea of the percentage of those attacks that happened in a gun-free zone? And a follow-up to that is, what are your thoughts on gun-free zones?
So I don't know what the answer to that question is in terms of how many of them occurred at places where guns were not to be allowed. Generally, this topic will come up at these kinds of events. I try not to get super political on it, but certainly as a police chief and as a citizen, I'm a fan of folks doing anything that's lawful, if that answers your question.
I have two questions. Do you have a ratio as far as how many tourniquets you should have, say, in a 200-member church?
I would have at least 10. Have one of the bigger kits would be a suggestion. I mean, if you could have 2 kits, that's a pretty good sized church, good sized parish. You know, they do get expensive when you get them in that size, but that North American Rescue does offer discounts to public service, schools, churches, etc. But I would say 1 kit of 10 to 12 or 2, depending on your budget.
Okay. And also, this hasn't come up tonight, but what about defibrillators?
The AEDs?
Yes.
So I won't get too far into this, but the normal percentage for what's called return of spontaneous circulation, or ROSC, in patients across the country is about 4 to 5%. The city of Seattle, they have mandatory laws that say every high school student has to be CPR certified, and that there is a defibrillator in every building in the city, not just public buildings, but every building, and their ROSC rates are up in the 70 to 80% range. So early defibrillation and early CPR saves lives. You mean like lawful type? I don't think it's mandatory. I think it's just public buildings in Texas. I'm not 100% sure on that, on the laws here in Texas. Before that, I was in Denver and Chicago and other places like that. Now I finally made it here, so it took me a while, but I got here. So I'm not sure what those are. I can't tell you, but I could look it up.
Wanted to thank y'all for the training, but what about disaster response? Have y'all thought about any training for that? You know, we did have a severe tornado, 8 years ago? Are y'all going to be offering any training for citizens for disaster responses?
So potentially, yes. Kaufman County has, I believe, a CERT program. Okay, Kaufman County, I believe, has a CERT program. The city of Forney doesn't offer that right now. We don't have a separate Department of Emergency Management like Kaufman County does, but I believe they do have a CERT program, which you can get that kind of training there. But that is something that we may very well look into in the future.
Do you know his contact?
Thank you, ma'am.
Do you happen to know his contact number?
Steve Huey, Kaufman County Emergency Management.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all. Up, we got one more.
What do you do when you're in a situation like a building where there's an active shooter and you're able to run, hide, grab a victim, and you lock yourself in a room? Are you going to have this tourniquet on you? What do you use?
So that's a case that it'd be an emergency or improvised tourniquet. You could use a belt. You could use a piece of fabric. You can use a shirt. Like I said, you just want to make it about 2 inches wide and find anything that is a solid. I could use this very expensive clicker if I needed to, and use it to do the same thing. And so you're going to place the tourniquet, or you place the piece of fabric, you'll tie a single knot in it, place the windlass or your improvised windlass over the top, tie another knot, and then just keep turning. You're going to have to turn a lot with your improvised tourniquets because they're not designed to be as effective.
If there are no other, go ahead. Here we go.
Okay, on the church shooting.
Yes, sir.
In a situation I noticed on the screen when I first saw it and stuff, from the standpoint of other guns came out. The guy's down, but other guns came out. Now, the one shooter, in my understanding, should be the guy that should or could leave his gun out, but others, when they all start coming out, that could be a bad situation.
It could be a bad situation. I'm going to make some assumptions here, but that church community probably knows everybody pretty well. They probably have knowledge of who is on the security team within that church, so that's good. I'm always a fan of some form of uniform to help identify who's supposed to be performing a security function or who's not. But I would imagine that most of the congregants probably knew who was supposed to be doing that just based on their interactions. But you're exactly right. The officers who show up and are responding to that, they have to make instantaneous decisions about who's a threat and who's not a threat, and you really don't want to be holding a gun when we turn around the corner in one of these kinds of situations. It's a very tough situation for us.
So it's best to leave it holstered like I thought.
At that point, particularly if there's no other immediate threat, it would be best to put it holstered and put your hands up. Yes, sir.
I have a question real quick. In a church setting, standing, sitting, you know, up and down, constant, if there's something that's better to do. Because I noticed they were all sitting, but if you think about how many times you stand up and then how many times you sit down, you know, you're easily distracted. If there's something that's a better protocol with that situation.
I don't think there necessarily is. You know, people come to church in order to worship and in order to connect with their community, connect with God, whatever. At a church that has a good security program, there are people, part of the security team, the ushers and so on, who are the dedicated folks to try and watch and remain situationally aware of what's going on. I never let my guard down anywhere that I go. I'm always situationally aware, always looking at people no matter what it is and constantly watching. I can do that sitting, I can do it standing. It's just kind of a mindset and awareness type thing. Obviously, when the bullets start flying, then you want to get low, you want to move, you want to get off of what we call the X, and just change so that somebody that's trying to get after you has to reformulate what they're thinking about, and you're not just a sitting duck. Does that help at all? All right, thanks.
Yeah, I'm Ken Wynn. I'm a Dallas police volunteer, and I'm a member of CERT. Matter of fact, when that tornado hit out here, they called me at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I came out, search and rescue, what have you. And but anyway, here a while back, we had a situation in my own house out in my shop, and I called a guy, and 5 new police over that way looking. They had a helicopter out there. They were looking about 7 guys. Anyway, I went out in my backyard, hiding in my building. My wife's on the walkie-talkie phones and everything, contacting police. I already heard gunshots and everything. Anyway, I brought the guy back in my shop. My wife notified police I had the guy held right there in my shop. And when they ran in, about 30 officers came in behind me, or they was facing me. As soon as they came through where I could see them, I turned my back to the officer and uncocked the gun, lowered it to the ground, in which they took it out of my hand when they came by. But I made sure they saw my hands, and I didn't have that gun facing them, and they took over from there. But anyway, I appreciate everything y'all do, and
Thank you, sir.
In light of the fact what happened with that shooting in Wisconsin, and with all these things happening, why didn't they canvass that guy that came in there with that gun and was shooting all those people? Excuse me. That just happened a little while at the Miller Brewery in Wisconsin. Somebody, a person came in there with a gun and shot these people. And why didn't they have enough training to let the company know that this thing could have happened to the employees there? Did you hear about that in Wisconsin? The Miller Brewery.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I think several people were killed. And I just cannot believe that. How did this guy get in there with the gun?
Weapons are very easy to conceal.
But I mean, in light of the fact that all these things are happening in our country, and we're trying, you're informing us what to look for. You know, you see something, you say something. Why didn't somebody notice that guy coming in there with that gun?
I don't have an answer to that. I'm sorry. Any other questions? Mr. Hancock, there's either way. Go ahead, sir. What's your question?
Okay. Part observation. The diagram you had of the nightclub fire.
Yes, sir.
Where the 18 people were, that's in a room full of steel chairs with a glass outside wall. And they piled up at the door. If somebody in there had had the presence of mind to look out the place before they went in it, they
could have been the leader that got everybody out of that room.
Windows can very easily be improvised exits. You're exactly right. Right. And just a little tidbit, if you ever go to break a window, where you want to try to strike that window is at a corner. Most glass now is fairly flexible. If you try to hit it right in the middle of the window, you're likely to have whatever you hit it with bounce directly back. So if you want to break a window, hit it in the corner with the smallest, strongest object that you can, like the leg of a chair or something like that. Yes, sir.
So my classrooms, like the front's just glass. Like, how would you prevent someone from coming in there?
They all look like those windows up there. They goes to Ray, and it's the whole front of them. There's solid glass.
Gotcha. So that's one of the things that particularly new schools and new buildings, this whole desire to have open concepts and everybody can see everything, there can be some struggles with that. So what I encourage is, if you've got a glass panel front room like that, is look at the corners. If you've got, like up there where that officer is standing, if you walk around where the seam is of the window and the wall and you look, there's an area in that corner where you're likely not to be able to see. That would be the area that you would try to get to so that folks couldn't see inside. The other thing is that on a structure like that, if that metal that's up there is magnetic, you can make some very inexpensive covers for those windows using felt, magnets, and hot glue. So that if a critical incident happens and you need to immediately make it to where nobody can see in there, you just put those up that are pre-cut. These are recommendations that I made to several teachers that have rooms like that, and that can quickly turn that into a wall that you can't see through.
Thank you. Thanks.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Right. So my recommendation would be, if your son goes to Coffin Schools, reach out to that jurisdiction there, reach out to the school, ask them what kind of training might be available. At the Forney Police Department and within our jurisdiction, we will conduct these trainings really for any organization, any school that requests it, or similar type trainings. So we're very active, very happy to come out and do that. And Forney Police Department has, even before I was associated with Forney Police Department, was going out and giving these presentations.
And CareFlite, we will come to the school. We can do the stop the bleed part of it. I would be definitely missing a large portion of it with the active shooter part, but we can at least do the stop the bleed training if the school requests it.
Is there an age limit you would not start this? 4 or 5 years old, would you just start? I mean, I started my son very young.
My son learned how to put, he's 17 now, but at 5, he was able to put a tourniquet on. And by the time he was 7, he was able to start IVs. But I mean, that's me, I'm a little bit, you never know. There might, maybe a little hangover, I don't know. But there's no time too young, really, to be aware of what's going on and to be prepared for it. I think it's just kind of an answer. But
yeah, what we know from the data is, you remember that I talked about, most active shooter suspects are not going to try and get through a locked door. That has been very successful in school shootings. That little thing that you drop down into the floor that I showed, a lot of school campuses have put that in, and they're effective. They are good strategies.
What is the minimum amount of people that you would need to start, like, to do one of those classes? Because the company that I work with, we have freelancers, so we don't work in just one place. We actually set up, like, the projection and everything that you see here, basically.
Okay, I mean, I don't have a minimum amount, but I wouldn't, if I tried to do classes for less than 10 people or so, it would get a little bit hectic in the county.
Well, folks, it is a little bit past 9 o'clock, so we're going to wrap this up. If you have any other questions that you want to ask us individually, feel free to come out. Otherwise, it was a pleasure to interact with you. You all have a very safe evening. Thank you.